Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, helping you prepare for the PMP exam. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where we teach you the right way to get ready for the PMP exam. I am your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. Don't steal, don't cheat, and don't lie. That pretty much sums up this lesson because we look at the PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, which is intended to guide us PMPs in our daily work lives. We have split this lesson up into two parts, and here are the learning goals for both parts. At the end, you will be able to describe the 4 values from the Code of Ethics, explain aspirational and mandatory standards for each of those 4 values, describe behavior that is okay and behavior that is not okay. You know what gifts you can accept and which ones you should not be accepting, and you can answer sample questions with the professional code of ethics in mind. The PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct is not part of the PMBOK guide. Instead, you can find it on the PMI website. They do hide it rather well, so if you can't find it there, go to pmprepcast.com. We have a link to it in the exam resources section. It's in the latter part of that document where you will find the Code of Ethics. Let's start with a little bit of history here. On January 1st, 2007, the new PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct came into effect. This new code was 3 years in the making. It got approved by the PMI board in October of the year before, and it replaced all existing PMI ethics codes as one single standard, because in the past a PMI volunteer was held responsible to a different code of ethics than a PMP was. But starting with this new code, we will now all be held to the same standard. The most obvious difference in the two codes, the old one and the new one, is the size. The old PMP code of ethics that fit onto one page, and the new one is 6 pages long. Like many PMI-related standards, this code is a consensus. As a project manager, it'll give you direction in regards to ethical and professional conduct, but the code also distinguishes between aspirational standards and mandatory standards. This separation leaves a lot of wiggle room, and it shows that ethics are difficult to put into words, especially when you need to consider the needs of a worldwide community with varying cultural and social backgrounds like us project managers. While preparing the new code, the PMI Ethics Standards Development Committee, they surveyed PMI members around the world to determine our values, and the values that the global project management community defined as most important were these 4 here: responsibility, respect, fairness, and honesty. These 4 values, they have become the foundation and also the 4 major sections of the Code of Ethics. For each value, this code describes appropriate behavior. The code provides a description for each value, and then it gives you aspirational as well as mandatory standards. This means that a part of the standard is mandatory and another is optional, but you should aspire to achieve the optional ones nevertheless. There are also clarifying comments in each of the sections. The Code of Ethics applies to you both as a PME aspirant, as a student, and later on as a PMP. First, as a PMP aspirant. When you apply for the PMP exam, you will be required, or you have already signed, the PMP Candidate Agreement and Release Form. In it, you state that as a PMP aspirant, you will comply with this code. One example that is very close to my heart is the fact that the code states that we do not abuse the intellectual property rights of others. Unfortunately, one PMP aspirant ignored that, and within 3 months of purchasing the Project Management Prepcast, he made it available on his website and was sharing it with others. This was, of course, both a violation of the Code of Ethics as well as US copyright law, so we got in touch with this aspirant and we asked him to stop. Today he is in fact an affiliate and he is selling the Prepcast legally. Another example is, of course, you don't cheat on the PMP exam. Yes, it is unbelievable, but there are in fact ways to cheat on the PMP exam. But of course, you are not supposed to. And once you pass the PMP exam, the code also applies to you as a PMP. Now you should exercise responsibility, and that means that you take ownership of the decisions you make or fail to make. You should show respect. You show respect to yourself and others and the resources that have been entrusted to you. You will apply fairness when making decisions, and you will act impartially and objectively. And finally, you will also employ honesty in both your communication and conduct. If we all manage to live up to these high standards from the code, we will improve the respect towards our profession as well as enrich today's business world. Applying the code in your daily dealings with work colleagues and your colleagues in the professional organizations will also set you apart. The code can assist you in making wise decisions, especially if you're faced with difficult situations when you might be asked to compromise your integrity and your values. But by sticking to the code, you show others that you are upstanding and ethical project manager. Take this a step further. If your colleagues know about you in this way, this will be part of your reputation. And being honest and ethical makes finding a new job so much more easier than if you had the reputation of stealing and backstabbing and lying. In just a moment, we will look at these 4 sections in detail. But first, let's talk about 2 terms that are often discussed in conjunction with the Code of Ethics. They are culture shock and ethnocentrism. They are easy enough to understand. Culture shock, of course, refers to the initial disorientation that you will experience when you are visiting another culture or country. If you live in Asia and you have never visited Europe or the other way round, then you will feel disoriented. And if you've ever done this, you know exactly what I mean. Because everything is so different, there is a chance of you being shocked at first. Then, ethnocentrism. It's closely related. This is a belief that we all have about our own culture, and that is that your own culture is superior to other cultures. Logically, we know this is not the case and that they are all pretty much on the same level. They are just different, but deep in our hearts, we tend to prefer our own culture because, well, it's just better, isn't it? And that is ethnocentrism. Okay, now let's take a look at these 4 major sections that we find in the code. And once again, they are responsibility, respect, fairness, and honesty. And for each of these, we will first look at the aspirational and then at the mandatory standards. The first 2 of these 4, responsibility and respect, we will look at here in part 1, and then fairness and honesty we will look at in part 2. And by the way, as you read through the Code of Ethics, it's just one of those documents that you will have to read in preparation for the exam. Make a mental note about which of these standards are aspirational and which ones are mandatory, because we have seen sample questions that asked things like, which of the following are aspirational standards of the respect section in the Code of Ethics? So be aware which ones are aspirational and which ones are mandatory in order to answer sample questions like that correctly. Let us begin with responsibility. Responsibility is defined as our duty to take ownership for the decisions we make or fail to make, the actions we take or fail to take, and the consequences that result from this. Unfortunately, not doing this as a behavior is something that we learn early on as children, and I'm sure everyone has an experience like this one. As a child, you ran around the house or you play with a ball and you're out in the garden and you break something. The first thing that you do as a child, you cover it up or you run away and you hope that the grown-ups don't see you or didn't see you do it, and later on when someone asks you, you have no idea how it broke because you were someone else. But as a PMP, of course, you aspire to take responsibility. Now let's move on. Let's take a look at the aspirational and mandatory standards here in the responsibility section of the code. We have 2 slides full of these standards, and here is the first batch, aspirational ones on the left here and the mandatory ones on the right. First of all, you do your utmost that the decisions that you make are in the best interest of everyone is an aspirational standard, and you will also only accept those assignments for which you are qualified. Of course, there is always the situation where a new and challenging assignment comes up, the one that stretches your experience into new directions. Those are okay as well, as long as you make it clear to the stakeholders that you want it, but that you may not necessarily have all the right qualifications yet. And then, once you have accepted the assignment, you follow through. You aspire to do what you said you would do. On the other side, we have the first 3 mandatory standards here, and they are, first of all, it talks about policies and rules and regulations in the code. Because in every industry, there will be such policies, rules and regulations and laws that govern our daily work. It is our responsibility to uphold these and to inform the appropriate authorities if we see that others are not upholding them. The code also makes it mandatory for us to report unethical or illegal conduct. And then the third one here, the code also talks about ethics complaints. Since we are supposed to hold each other responsible to uphold the code of ethics, the PMI provides a process to us in which we can bring violations of this code to the attention of the appropriate body for resolution. And here is part 2 of the mandatory and aspirational standards in the responsibility section. The first question, that this one here on the left under aspirational answers, is the question, well, what if we do make mistakes? Well, then we accept these mistakes and we take ownership and we do make the necessary corrections here. And we don't run away like a child that broke a vase with a ball. And if it has to be, if it happens so, then yes, we will aspire and we will accept any consequences that come from our mistakes. One standard that doesn't need much explaining is the protection of confidential information. If we are given any confidential information from our customers, then we will, of course, safeguard it. And lastly, under the aspirational section, we uphold the PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, and we hold each other accountable to it. On the other side, on the mandatory, we have just one final mandatory standard. It is a clarification in regards to these ethics complaints we talked about on the previous slide. Yes, we must file an ethics complaint if some of our PMP colleagues are acting unethically. But the code also says that this should not be frivolous. You may file an ethics complaint, but only if it is substantiated by facts. All right, those were the aspirational and mandatory standards from the responsibility section of the Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. Now let's take these and let's translate them into behavior that is okay and not okay for us as PMPs. Let's begin here on the left-hand side with 3 behaviors that are okay. First of all, accepting stretch assignments and informing stakeholders at the same time. Mentioned this already. There are always new challenges ahead of us as project managers because by definition, projects are something new. So if you are accepting a new project, something that you have never done before, something that you may be a little bit uncertain about, may not have the 100% perfect qualifications to do, well, yes, accept it, inform the stakeholders, and move on. Try, of course, to get the appropriate training if needed. Of course, second responsibility, the second behavior that is okay under this area here is reporting illegal or unethical conduct to the authorities as soon as we find it. And by authorities, we not only mean, of course, the police, we also simply mean our supervisors. If we notice that somebody in our organization is not following the internal rules that we find. Then the third behavior that is okay, taking disciplinary action against individuals who knowingly make false statements. This could simply be taking a disciplinary action against a team member on your project that is not behaving properly and who is lying on the project. So these are 3 behaviors that are okay for us as a PMP. On the other side, not okay would be things like bidding on contracts for which the company is not qualified. So if you do not have the experience to do a contract, then it's simply not okay to bid on that contract and lead the customer to believe that you will be able to perform the contract. And of course, engaging in illegal activities, that's a big no-no for us as PMPs. We got to stay away from that. And the last one on the right-hand side under the not okay is abusing intellectual property rights. You will see this come up a couple more times here, so you will, just by the number of times that it appears here in the code, in the behavior, you will realize that this is an important area, the intellectual property rights section, and you have to keep this in mind, not just for the PMP exam, but also for yourself in your daily dealings on your projects as a project management professional. The next section in the code is respect. And respect is defined as showing a high regard for ourselves, others, and the resources that have been entrusted to us. So let us now move on from this definition here, and let's take a look again at the standards, the aspirational standards, as well as the mandatory standards that we can find in the code itself. In today's global marketplace, respect of others is important. If we begin working on a new project with a new project team from different cultures, then it is my duty as a PMP to try and learn their norms and customs. What is okay in my culture may not be okay in yours, and if I respect you, I will try and minimize your culture shock. For one example here, my mother tongue is Swiss German. It is always listed as a very direct language that has a very low context. We don't beat around the bush. When I ask someone in Switzerland for a favor, then the conversation will sound to Swiss natives as incredibly rude sequence of direct orders and instructions like do this or do that. Because I know this, I am adjusting my style. When I speak to others here in the United States of America, I make sure to add more context into my sentence, and I add lots of would you pleases, do thises, and could you please do that's into my speech. That is respect towards the culture that I have chosen to live in. Similarly, as a PMP, you should aspire to listen to other people's point of view. This is not only the respectful thing to do, but it will also give you a broader understanding of all the issues that are going on in your project. Only if you listen to what others have to say will you be able to actually do the right work. But then there are always those people with whom we have problems. Here the code is challenging us in such a way that it tells us to directly approach those people with whom we have disagreements. And this aspirational standard ties right back into the overall understanding that the PMI has for a project manager, because a project manager is proactive. He addresses conflict proactively. So it's no wonder that this has become an aspirational standard. The code also recognizes that there are always, idiots that we have to work with. The code doesn't, of course, call them idiots, but it says that even the most difficult and unpleasant person whom you work with deserves your respect. They may not show you the respect that they should, but you will nevertheless aspire to show it to them and adhere to the professional code of conduct. Respect has a few more facets, and they are, of course, then on the right-hand side here, the mandatory standards. Here we have negotiation as one of them. When you negotiate, you must negotiate in good faith, without lying, because if you don't negotiate in good faith, then all you do is guess whether or not your counterpart is telling bigger lies than you are, and that is simply disrespectful on both sides. You must also never use your personal power to gain personal benefit. For instance, if you are negotiating, you could easily suggest that a certain favor from the negotiating partner would make their job much easier. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, know what I mean? And that they would certainly be awarded the contract if they did you a certain particular favor. So that's a big no-no here. And then there are two more mandatory standards, and they are simply the fact that we do not abuse others, and the fact, again, that we respect the property rights of others. And here are some of the behaviors that relate back to respect and that are considered to be okay on the left-hand side and not okay on the right side. I'm not going through these in detail. You can read them yourself as they appear here on the screen. They're pretty straightforward and they are self-explanatory in regards to what you can do or what you really shouldn't be doing. Instead of me reading these to you, let's explore another question that is closely related to this. Now that we have looked at responsibility and respect from the code, you may think that it seems almost impossible to always follow this code of ethics. Yes, the code does have a certain tone of overly goodness to it, doesn't it? Always be nice, always do the right thing, never stray from the right path. But think about this. Wouldn't it be great if we worked in an environment in which everyone followed these standards? Life and work would be so much more pleasant if everyone treated everyone else like this. And that is what we want to aspire to, and that is why we seek to follow the aspirational standards in the code as often as we can, and the mandatory standards all the time. And second, someone once said that respect must be earned. So would that then mean that we must apply these standards from the respect section to people whom we have known for some time and have come to respect? No, certainly not. The respect we are talking about here is the respect we give you as a person and as an individual, and not the kind of respect that must be earned, like I respect your know-how in a certain field. Respecting people as individuals means that you treat them the way that you want others to treat yourself. And this concludes our look at Part 1 of the PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. We have talked about responsibility and respect, and in Part 2 we will discuss fairness and honesty, and we look at a few scenarios where you will have to select the correct and ethical way of responding. So see you in Part 2. Until next time.